The 2026 Formula One season was always going to shake things up. Brand new engine regulations, a massive shift in power unit architecture, and 5 manufacturers all chasing different solutions to the same set of problems. But what nobody anticipated was just how dramatically the political chess match between those manufacturers would unfold, or how spectacularly it would backfire on almost everyone involved. Let's start with the biggest story coming out of pre-season, Mercedes and the compression ratio controversy that has the entire paddock in an uproar. The rules governing the new 2026 power units state a maximum compression ratio of 16:1, measured at ambient conditions. That rule seems straightforward enough. But Mercedes identified something the other manufacturers missed entirely, a way to use thermal expansion and materials technology to exceed that mandated compression ratio once the engine reaches operating temperature. Some claims suggest Mercedes engines could be hitting as high as 18:1 when running at full heat, potentially delivering a lap time advantage of around 1/10 of a second per lap. Over a race distance, that is not a small number. Audi, Honda, Ferrari, and eventually Red Bull all raised the alarm. With 4 manufacturers united against one, the FIA was forced to act. Their proposed solution was to change the testing protocol from the 1st of August, requiring the compression ratio to be measured at both ambient temperature and at a representative operating temperature of 130 degrees centigrade. That rule went to a vote among the power unit manufacturers, the FIA, and Formula One's commercial rights holder, and it was expected to pass comfortably. Worth noting here, Toto Wolff never flinched. He insisted throughout that the Mercedes engine is entirely legal, that its design had been reviewed and approved by the FIA, and he was correct on both counts. The engine passes every test the FIA administers. It is similar in concept to the flexible wing debate that surfaces in Formula One every few years, technically compliant with the regulations as written, but arguably not in the spirit of them. Williams team principal James Vowles, whose team runs a Mercedes power unit, dismissed the whole situation as just noise that will probably go away in the next 48 hours. Red Bull's position had been less clear given their new status as an independent power unit manufacturer in 2026. That changed when team principal Laurent Mekies stated plainly, "We don't think it's noise, we think we must have clarity on what we can and cannot do." So with the FIA's cold and hot testing proposal on the table, you would expect the complaining manufacturers to vote for it immediately and close the loophole. That is not what happened. The reason is both fascinating and embarrassing for the teams involved. Several manufacturers had been pushing specifically for a hot-only test, because a hot-only test would have allowed them to configure their own engines to run above 16:1 when cold, then drop down to the legal limit once up to operating temperature. A cold and hot test makes that strategy completely impossible, because the "comply at all times" clause in the original regulations would then apply in both conditions. The very teams who demanded action against Mercedes were now voting against the rule change they themselves had initiated. Toto Wolff summarized the situation in Bahrain with characteristic calm. "I think the way it's been done now is that it needs to be compliant to the regulations when it's cold and when it's hot. So it doesn't give anybody an advantage, because I think the attempt was from the other guys to have it only measured hot so they could actually have it cold outside of the regulations. So now it's fair game for everyone." A former power unit technical director explained to the race exactly why the cold and hot test creates problems for the other 4 manufacturers. Typically, an engine with a 16:1 compression ratio when cold would drop to around 15.2, 1-inch operation, because although the connecting rod expands with heat, the engine block expands more. The proposed hot test would involve stripping the cylinder heads, fitting measurement devices, and heating the engine in an oven to 130 degrees centigrade. Had the test been hot only, it would have been entirely feasible to design an engine that runs beyond 16:1 when cold, falling to exactly 16:1 at operating temperature, giving Ferrari, Red Bull, Honda, and Audi more cold running power than currently permitted. The cold test closes that door permanently. The bottom line is that whatever advantage Mercedes have found is locked in for the entire 2026 season. The rivals who pushed hardest to stop them have ended up with a rule that protects Mercedes and restricts themselves. It is one of the more remarkable own goals in recent Formula One political history. While that controversy was dominating the headlines, Ferrari were quietly building what could be the most significant race day advantage on the grid, and it has nothing to do with compression ratios. For the new 2026 regulations, The MGU-H, the small electric motor that previously spun up the turbocharger to eliminate turbo lag, has been eliminated entirely due to its extraordinary cost and mechanical complexity. Without the MGU-H, teams must spool their turbos using the internal combustion engine alone. This creates a fundamental design decision. A larger turbo delivers more peak power but takes longer to spool up, while a smaller turbo reaches operating pressure faster but produces less maximum power. Ferrari made their choice approximately 1 year ago, opting for a smaller turbocharger and accepting the trade-off in peak power in exchange for response and deployment speed. The results during Bahrain testing were striking. During one of the start simulations, Lewis Hamilton launched from the 9th row of the grid and reached the lead by the first corner passing cars that had started on the front row, including Kimi Antonelli's Mercedes and Max Verstappen's Red Bull. Esteban Ocon in the Haas Ferrari was on a near-identical trajectory before the team deliberately cut his power deployment before turn 1 as a precautionary measure. Ocon himself acknowledged, "Me and Lewis, we rocket past everybody pretty much." The Ferrari starts have been described as consistent and repeatable across multiple cars, the Haas and the Ferrari itself, which is particularly significant. Other teams are struggling with the complexity of pre-spooling their turbos before the race start, with one driver describing the process as "everything seems to be fighting everything else." That is simply not the case for Ferrari-powered cars. They are also running in second gear at corners where rival teams have been forced to downshift to first, and rival drivers have specifically noted Ferrari's stronger performance on corner exits, another direct consequence of better throttle responsiveness from the smaller turbo architecture. At the opposite end of the spectrum sits Audi, believed to be running the largest turbocharger on the grid. They have been among the slowest off the start line in testing, and will face similar challenges at every corner exit throughout the season. At a power-dependent circuit like Miami or Las Vegas, the raw straight-line advantage might compensate. At Monaco, it almost certainly will not. The third major story from pre-season involves Aston Martin and their Honda power unit, and it is significantly less encouraging than either of the previous two narratives. Expectations for Aston Martin in 2026 were arguably the highest of any team on the grid. The arrival of Adrian Newey, a completed new factory and wind tunnel, and the acquisition of Honda's power unit had created genuine anticipation. The unveiling of the AMR26 with its radical aerodynamic design added further excitement. What followed in testing was the opposite of everything those expectations had promised. Aston Martin nearly missed the first test in Barcelona entirely. In Bahrain, the car spent extended periods in the garage, suffered persistent reliability failures, and on the final day of testing, managed just 6 laps due to a combination of battery problems and a shortage of spare parts. Honda Racing President Koji Watanabe held an emergency press conference and stated, "Frankly speaking, the pre-season testing proved extremely challenging for us. We were unable to achieve the anticipated performance, and a complex set of issues became apparent." Do you think Toto Wolff deliberately baited the other manufacturers into a rule change that would leave them worse off than before? And can Aston Martin and Honda genuinely turn this around before the season opener? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you want to follow every twist of the 2026 season as it unfolds, make sure you are subscribed.